I have been animating now for over 10 years in Blender, and in all of that time as I've developed my animation, as you can see here on the screen, it's taken just little steps at a time, just learning the basics and then building on top of the basics. So instead of doing a complicated tutorial on animation, this is going to be as simple as you can get. This is going to be for beginners. And what you can see here is the little example we're going to be doing today, a follow along tutorial, and it's going to be as simple as it can get. We're going to be looking at the basic concepts of the location, rotation, and the scale in our viewport, and then we're going to be using those and animating them over time. So in this case, we're going to start at frame 1, and by the time we get to frame 100, we would have made our cube rotate, scale, and move. And the cool thing here is we'll also be looking at how to animate a property. So in this case, we're going to take something like the viewport display color, and I'll show you how we can use animation and keyframing to make this also change over time. We'll also quickly look at how to do something with the object data properties and the shape keys, just as a quick little example showing you how you can make the shape change over time. So not only will we make it change its 3D location, but we'll actually change the shape of the cube itself to become a pyramid as it moves through space. Now, there's nothing specific about this animation. It's not really a final result. It's kind of random, but the idea here is to teach you something. And I really hope you can learn as a beginner the nice and simple follow along method of the very basics of animation in Blender. So let's jump in, and I hope you guys enjoy and that this will kickstart your animation journey. So when you open Blender, this is going to be what you see, your brand new fresh document, and we're just going to be using the default cube that comes in Blender. So to stop the distraction, we're just going to select the camera and the light by clicking and dragging over them, and just press delete on your keyboard. And for your convenience, I'm going to enable something that I have. This is just going to allow you to see my keys being pressed here. It's just an add-on that I have. It's going to make things a bit easier. And let's go ahead now. So what we're going to do is we'll start by selecting the default cube. This is a fantastic object to use. Now I'm in the front view, so you can just go to view and then go to viewport and just go into your front orthographic, which is where we are now. And over here in Blender, in just the main layout, what you're going to see down here is this thing here called the timeline. To see it a little bit better, you can just hover over the top of it here and click and just drag it up. And now you can see the timeline here. You can roll your middle mouse button over the timeline to make it smaller or bigger. And if you want to move, you can just click and hold the middle mouse button in and then move your mouse side to side. So that's just a navigation for this timeline over here. So what we're going to do, we're going to work on a little bit of a smaller timeline. So you can see here, it starts at frame 1 and it grows to frame 250. Now, what's also happening, and we'll quickly go over to our render settings here. Or I think our output. Let's go to our output. That's where it lives. If you go to your output, you can go over under your format. There's something here called as well the frame range. It's just this tab over here. And you can see here, this is the same thing that you see over here, starting at frame 1 to 250. That essentially means that's 250 frames. And under the format here, the frame rate here is 24 frames a second. So for every second that passes when this animation plays, 24 of these frames are going to be displayed. Okay, in this case, we can also make it 60 or whatever, 120, 240. You can go crazy, but for now, let's just stick to the default 24. So let me give you an example. This cube is currently sitting in our 3D space. So if we take this slider here, click and drag on it, we put it at frame 1. We can come to frame 1, and with our cube here selected, we can press N, and the N key will bring up our properties over here on the side, our properties panel. And we're going to go for now to the item. And over here, we can see a few of the properties that describe where our cube is located in the 3D scene. And it's really quite simple. Okay, so we have over here the Z component. In our front view, you can see it quite well. It's this blue line. That's the Z axis. So Z positive will be going up, Z negative will be going down. And it's the same with the X. If X goes this way, the X can go that way. And then if we kind of go to the side, you can see this green axis line here, that's the Y. And this pretty much can describe the position of our cube in a 3D space. It's what makes it 3D. The three axes are what make it a three-dimensional space, and that's what the free in 3D refers to. Okay, so what we're gonna do is, I'll just quickly demonstrate. If you select this cube and you come over here to your location, you can come here to the X, and let's just say, for example, you type in 0.5. So now we've moved the cube over 0.5 into positive. You can also click here and then go minus, for example, minus 0.5, hit enter, and now it's moved the other way in the negative. Then you can also just come here and drag it, and you can do the same on the Y, and you can't actually see it in the Y because we're in orthographic. But if you actually move and you look like this, you can actually see it's moving on the Y. And if I click here on the Z, it's moving on the Z. If you want to reset these, all you have to do is come here in the viewport and you can go Alt G and that'll reset these. Or you can come over here hovering over them and just go backspace and that'll reset these. Okay, so now let's also look at the rotation. The rotation has the same idea. We can come here and rotate on the X, and you can see it now rotates around this X. We can come here to the Y and it rotates around this Y axis, and the same works for the Z. And at this point, you've probably already figured it out. The exact same goes for the scaling. If we scale it, we can squish it on the X in this case, or we can come here on the Y. Now you're probably seeing in this case, even though I'm doing this, I'm now doing it on the Y, for example here, but in this situation, it's actually scaling along the X, or at least it looks this way because currently Blender is using local space. So in other words, instead of looking at the world as your perspective, it's looking at the local coordinates of this cube. And for you to be able to see them, you can go over to your object data properties over here, this little cube. You can go down to visibility. And I think you might be able to see it here. If not, just go to your viewport display. I haven't used this in quite a while because it's more not something you use as a beginner really. But if you wanted to, you can come here to the viewport display and enable axes. And now you can see the local axes. So the Z is actually over here. And that's the local Z. So if I actually come over here and I come in my viewport and I go Alt S and I go Alt R and I go Alt G, it just resets those transforms. And you can now see if I scale on the Z here, it looks like it's scaling on the world Z axis, because in our world here, Z, as you can see over here, is going up and down. But in reality, it's actually following the local Z coordinate of our object. And if I were to now come here to the Z and, or maybe even the X, rotate it on the X, I can see the Z is now pointing here. So if I grab that Z and move it like that, that's what we have. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. I'm just trying to get you to kind of understand the difference between these two. So there are going to be times where you're going to be relying on this, and sometimes you'll be using the global position, but that's not stuff we need to worry about too much at the moment. So for now, with our cube, just go Alt G, Alt R, and Alt S to reset any of these transforms. So Alt S resets scale, Alt R resets rotation, and Alt G just the position. So now let's do some actual animation. Let's go into our front view. So I'm just pressing 1 on my number pad to do that. And let's say we want to do something with our cube here. In our front view, we're going to take our cube, we're going to come to frame 1. And on frame 1 of this cube selected, okay, we're going to come here to our location. And hovering over this location, we're going to press I on our keyboard. So I, and once you press I, it now adds this yellow coloration. And you can also see over here in the timeline, you now have this thing called a keyframe. So now it's saying at frame 1, this is the data, the values that are going to be in the location. And that's going to always be the case. So if we now come over to, for example, frame 40 and we drag the slider up. So frame 40 would be roughly about 2 seconds in at 24 frames, roughly. And what we can do is we can now, for example, say, let's go over here and type in -1 on the X and hit enter. And you can see it's now moved over a value of 1. Or maybe let's even go -3. Okay, -3 is better. And now on frame 40, we're going to hover over this and press I again to insert that keyframe, and it's now yellow. And you can see on frame 40, we have that keyframe. So now if we drag back to frame 1, and we come over here and we click on the play button, you can see over time that happens. How cool is that? So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to make this 100 frames over here. So we're only working with 100 frames for now. And let's come over here and go back to frame 40. And on frame 40, let's also come and bring it up on the Z. Let's type in 2 meters over here, 2 meters. And even though this is already yellow, if it goes orange again, on frame 40, let's just hover over it and press I. and now it becomes yellow again. So now if we go to frame 1 and we hit the spacebar, now over 40 frames, not only is it going to go -3 meters on the X, it's also going to go +2 meters on the Z. How cool is that? So now we have told the cube to do something over time. We can also do the same thing with the other things here. So let's maybe say on frame 10, we want to come over here, and you can see here they're all set to 0, the rotation. So let's hover over it and press I. So at frame 10, they're all at 0 and before. And now let's go up to frame 50. And on frame 50, what we're going to do is we're going to rotate it 45 degrees on the X. And let's go maybe 45 degrees on the Z. So type in 45. And then hovering over this, press I to insert a keyframe. And now on frame 50, you can see we have that yellow keyframe, and this is turned yellow. So now if we go to frame 1 and we hit the spacebar, not only are we getting movement, but we're getting rotation as well. Now let's take it a step further. Maybe let's come to frame 1, and on frame 1, we're going to take the scale, which is currently gray because there's no keyframe. Let's just come here and press I, hovering over it. And the value we're going to do now is maybe, let's go to frame 60, and on frame 60, let's just come over here, and you could manually go to each one of these and type in a value, right? Like I can go to each one and do 3, but it's actually better just to click and hold in your button, drag down to highlight all of them at the same time, and then you can, for example, type in a value. So I'm going to go 0.3 and hit enter. And then I'm going to come over here, and with that values in, I'm going to press I to insert a keyframe. And now that's on frame 60. So between frame 1, where we set this all as just a value of 1, and frame 60, the scale is going to go down 70 by a value of 0.7. So it's going to get smaller over time. So if we go to frame 1 and we hit the spacebar to play, you can see now it's shrinking. So we've essentially used keyframes now and these transforms to do a very simple animation. We've told our cube to go forward and up in space. We've told it to rotate in 3D space, and we've told it to scale in 3D space. So now you can see how powerful this is, and it's very simple once you understand it. But let's say we want to do something else, okay? Let's go over and animate a property, and this is where things get really fun. So we're going to go over to our material properties, and over here, if you scroll up, you can see by default the cube has a material. Now when we actually render, it's actually this surface information that's going to render. But for now, we'll just drop this down because we're not focusing on rendering. And we're just going to go all the way down, just closing all of these. But the only one we're going to focus on is the viewport display. And that's the color you see in the viewport. Okay, it's not the color you see when you render your animation, but it is what you see in the viewport. And by default, it's set to white. So let's come here and change this to a nice red color. And now let's say we want to come to frame 1. And on frame 1, our cube, we want it to be red. So we're going to come over here, and you're going to hover over here, and you're going to see there's something called an animate property. And you can click that, and now there's a yellow outline, and now that we've added a keyframe. You can also just hover over it and press I, and that'll do the same thing. Okay, that now is yellow around it. And then what we can do is we can come up to maybe frame 80. And on frame 80, let's grab this color, and now let's make it a nice intense blue, dark blue. And let's click here on the animate property, or once again, you can just hover over it and press I on your keyboard, and you can see it now has a yellow outline. And now we have a keyframe. Okay, and now if we go to frame 1 and we hit the spacebar, between frame 1 and frame 80, it's going to transition. So we can almost expect if we go halfway to frame 40, it should look a purple color, because if you combine blue and red evenly, what do you get? Purple. And that's why between 1 and 80, on frame 40, we're now seeing a purple cube. And now what you have, if you hit the spacebar, is not just a three-dimensional change in the 3D space, but we've taken a property, which is the color of the object in the 3D space, and using keyframes, we have animated that as well. And there you have it. Now, already you've learned quite a bit about animation. And the cool thing is, you can use these things for all sorts of nice, cool things. So for example, and I'll quickly show you, if we go over to Object Data Properties, there's something here called a shape key. So let's click plus to add a basis and then plus again. And the basis is just the default untouched version. And if you click on the shape key, you can tab into edit mode of your cube. And let's just go to our face select here. Let's just select this face with our key 1 selected. Let's just go S and scale it like so to make this look like a triangle or a pyramid. Let's go back into object mode. And now we have a keyframe here we can slide and we can use this value. So another cool thing we can do is maybe let's come to frame 1. And on frame 1, let's say we want this to be a cube. So we're going to drag this value down to 0. So there's no influence of this keyframe. And then we're going to click here to animate it. And let's come over to frame 100. And on frame 100, we'll drag this value all the way up to 1. So it becomes a pyramid. And then let's click on here to add that value in now at frame 100. So between frame 1 and frame 100, it's going to morph from a cube into a pyramid. So now we are really getting more into it. So I really hope you guys are able to follow along with this and see how simple the basics of animation are. Now, this is what I want to do in this tutorial. It's just cover the absolute basics. There is something I'll quickly show you, but it's not where we're going to get in too much, but just so you understand. If you go over here to this dropdown, you can change this to what's called the graph editor. You can click here and drag up to see it a little bit better. And essentially these curves here are just a different representation of our timeline, and it allows you to do things a little bit more refined. So for example, if you come here to the dropdown and go to the cube animation and then under the transforms, you can actually click on each one of these. So if we click on the X location, you can see over time the X has its own curve here, which you can then come here and grab. So for example, if I grab one of these handles on frame 40, where we have a keyframe, I can come over here and I can actually go S to scale that, to tighten it up so it's a little bit more sharp, so it's not as much of a curve in the animation. Or I can scale it up to make it a little bit slower. So if I scale it up nice and big, you can see if we go to frame 1 over here and we hit the space bar, that happens in a little bit more of a smooth way. Whereas if I grab this handle here and I go S and I tighten up nice and tight and maybe rotate it slightly, now this is going to happen a lot sharper. So if I go to frame 1 and I hit the space bar, that's happening a lot less smoothly. So I might just grab that again and scale that handle up, R to rotate it and just kind of make it where it was. And this is something that you probably won't use the very first time you start doing animation, but as you get more into animation, you'll start getting into the graph editor to smooth things out. But this is not something I want you to be intimidated about, because it is something that, believe me, I know it looks complicated with all of this wiring and spaghetti, but as you get into it, you will learn it, and it isn't as intimidating as you think. And I've seen a lot of people get into it relatively quickly, and they think to themselves, I can't believe I thought it was actually that difficult. So I don't want you to be intimidated. So we're just going to go back to the drop down, go back to our timeline, bring this down, and now you can see here, this is where we have our animation. So what I think we'll do now is we'll kind of leave it at that, because the whole point of this tutorial was to give you a beginner's introduction to animation, so you can kind of wrap your head around it and just do a fun little follow along where you don't get intimidated, and you can just kind of get the idea of these sort of pesky little keyframes and how to use them, and maybe just mess around with it. So I encourage you now to try and mess around with it, see what you can do, and have some fun. I'll see you next time.